Hi everyone, it's Chris from the Pigeon Letters design team. Welcome to Mini Berry Bouquets. I have practiced these over and over for you for our class today. I think because I really love painting them, and I hope that you will too. We're going to try a few different versions of these today, and they'll be great for gift tags for the holidays or any season, and also good for place cards or just a personalized note card. And the best part is they only take 10 minutes, and we'll learn a lot of different techniques for leaves and berries and changing and varying the shades of your greens today. And I hope that that will be really helpful for you in other projects. So I'd say take a look at the supply list and let's get started. Let's get started with our first little berry bouquet. I have mixed a good bit of crimson with some permanent rose. And I'm going to start off with a very saturated berry of a decent size. It's not going to be perfectly round, and that's totally fine. And I'm going to put another one right near it of a similar size to the first one. So we'll start with these two berries, and I always start with some berries, do greenery, and then go back to berries. So start off with just two next to each other, and I like to leave a little white part that indicates there's some light shining on the berry. Next, I clean my brush really well. I'm using my size 6 here, and I make a berry that's completely water, but I touch it to my first berry. So this is only with water on my brush, and what that does is it allows the first berry to bleed in to the wet area, and it gives us a really it gives us a different color and a different intensity, right? So, and I'm even picking up a little. I love to have a lot of contrast between my berries. I like to have some very light ones and some very dark ones, and then we'll vary the size as well. And I think that just adds some interest. And then we'll get to the part where I'll show you sort of how to layer them sort of after the fact, after we do a little bit of greenery. So let's make a few berries, maybe 5 to 7, because I like to have odd numbers. I usually start with 5 and add some greenery, and then come back and add a few more berries. So maybe we'll put a smaller one up here. Really wet brush there. And you can use your size 2 for this. For the smaller berries, sometimes the 2 is a little easier. And then like a little one right here. Just because I think it's fun to, like I said, to vary the sizes. And we'll come back and add some lighter toned ones in a minute. I'm gonna change to my 10, I think, and get it nice and wet. And we'll start with a few leaves. We're gonna keep this one not really holidays. We're adding the pink. It's kind of springy. You could do it with, like I said, blues or yellows or purples, whatever. I think we'll start with a good bit of sap green for these, and maybe even a little green gold. I think that will keep it very spring looking, and then we'll do some that are a little darker too. And I'm going to do a simple leaf, which is touch, push, and pull. Right? Yeah, I think that's right. No. Yes. Touch, push down, and pull toward you. So it's like one of the simplest types of leaves you can make. You can shape it a little if you want. I like to leave the white space in the center. It delineates like where the vein might be, and I think it's just a nice look. Let's get a little more pigment and do a couple of these, and then we'll kind of see what our symmetry is looking like how we're doing. So that's one side, and you could leave a leaf just like that. He's kind of cute just the way he is. Or you can do like the two-sided ones like this. So push and pick up. And then the same here on this side. You can kind of make an S curve or a C curve depending on what kind of shape you're looking for. So those are good. I'm gonna put just a little a little water on my brush. I'm gonna do a really lighter toned leaf up here. Looks very wet. Again, because then you have some variation in your leaves and in your berries when you're done. So I can pull, I just have water on my brush really. I can pull from this leaf with just the tip of my brush. Let's do it this way. I can pull from here and kind of pull a leaf out. and have him like coming down. So see, we're starting to get like a little bit of a bouquet effect here. All right, now I'm gonna put more sap on my brush than green gold, just to get a little bit of variation in our leaves. So this is gonna be more pure sap green. So you can see how it's just a little darker. And I'm putting it right up next to my berries. I'm not touching them because you'll get a lot of bleed then. One thing I sometimes do is touch the tips or the base of the leaves and let it bleed out, because I think that's pretty. So let's just add a couple more darker leaves, and then let's look at our composition of our bouquet and decide what we want to do next. Okay, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to rinse off that brush. I'm going to go back to my 6 and get just water on it again. And I'm going to touch this berry, which is not quite dry, almost, but not quite dry. So it won't bleed maybe as much as that first one we did, because this berry has dried a little bit. So I love that. I love that kind of, you get kind of like an ombre effect. I think that's pretty. This one up here is still very wet, but I think we could go ahead and add a little berry next to him. When your brush is dry, you can pick up pigment with it. And so if you dry it off on your paper towel, let's say a dry brush is a thirsty brush, so it will pick up pigment if you want it to not be quite as, quite as much bleeding over. So I like to have, like I said, an odd number of berries. So this leaf is fairly dry. So I'm going to show you how we can take our 6, and maybe a 2 would be better for this, but I'm going to do it with the 6, and make a little half berry here and fill it mostly in, and try not to paint on our leaf, which is tricky sometimes. But that gives you a little effect, right? There's a berry and he's hiding behind that leaf, so I think that's fun. And then this berry is pretty dry as well, so we can make a berry that hides behind another berry. And I think when you start doing some layering in these berry bouquets, that it just makes them look a little more fun and a little more interesting. So that's how you can layer some berries once you've already painted some leaves and other berries and then let them dry. So I would like to add another couple leaves maybe to this composition and then leave it, because I want it to be really, really simple and quick and easy. So let's add a couple more leaves here, and then we'll move on to our second berry bouquet. So I'm going to make this leaf, I'm going to add another way to layer here, and I'm going to make this leaf layered behind this berry. This berry's dry, so I can come right up to the edge of it and do the same thing that I just did by layering my berries, but now I have a leaf tucked behind a berry, and that also adds, I think, some more interest to it. And then the last thing I'm going to do is layer a leaf behind another leaf. This leaf is dry, so I'm going to take a leaf out like this, and I'm going to do the same thing I did. Take it right up to the edge. Try not to go over. That was my mistake. And that is why you should use a smaller brush. But that's okay. We can totally work with that. So I'm taking it right up to the edge of this leaf with my 2 now. And we'll take this leaf down and behind our existing leaf. All right, if you get bleeds or you go over, you can take just a little bit of paper towel and get like a little edge on it, and you can just dab that top leaf and dry it a little and clean it up, and then you can take a little more pigment and go right along the edge, like there's a shadow there. And now you've got your layered leaves, and it's, if you blend them or smear them, whatever, it's not a big deal. This isn't supposed to be super perfect. So I like this guy the way he is. I think he's kind of cute. So let's move on. For our second berry bouquet, I'm gonna mix Crimson and Scarlet Lake. This is gonna give me an orangey berry that's a little bit more like a traditional red for the holidays. We're gonna start with the same setup that we did before. I'm gonna try to make these in a like maybe a little bit of an arcing pattern. So we're gonna have different size berries, really saturated. Again, that's Crimson and Scarlet Lake, and you can see how that's a more traditional color. And on that one, I didn't leave the white space. It just ended up getting filled in, and it's totally fine. All right, let's go in and add some of those lighter toned berries too. So you can see I'm just following our normal process here of a lot of clean water on my brush. And I'm just butting these up next to some of the existing berries and letting their color and their pigment bleed into the wet space. And we're going to get a lot of nice contrast here between our lighter and our darker berries. So that's a good number to start with. I think what we'll do next are some traditional leaves like we did here, but we'll elongate them and we'll do them in more of a traditional green. So I'm actually gonna bring in some blues. I'm gonna take my sap green again as my base, and then I might bring in some indigo into that, or I'm gonna use cobalt blue, just a blue tone that you have that will make it a little more of a traditional green. So we're going to use the same technique. We're going to touch and pull, but we're just going to elongate these a little more. And we're just going to go ahead and touch, and we're just going to let the brush do the work, and we're going to pick it up at the end. And that can be a leaf, like we said, or we can come back and, bring it out wider with a second side. So let's make a few of those. Go back. Touch the tip and the base. I'd like to add for this one a little bit of pine. I think that would be nice for the holidays. So I'll show you, we can kind of play with it. I'll show you how I generally do pine, and I thought we might try a few new things today since we're here. All right. So the first thing you're gonna do is get your sap and your blue, and you're just gonna get it like really dark. I want this to be a little bit darker than our leaves are. So I'm gonna have a sprig of pine coming out this way. We're just gonna draw a line with it, okay? And I'm using my 2, and I'm having this be pretty saturated. That's pretty wet. And then we're gonna get a little bit of water on our brush and dab off a little bit of the pigment, and then we're gonna make the pine needles. So it's just I'm gonna plant my brush on this vein or stem, and I'm gonna flick out my needle. So it always comes out different every time, so let's just see how it works. I think it's okay if your brush is a little bit dry, because I feel like you get that kind of wispy pine look. And so we can get like a different tone here on either side. We can add back some of the dark to the center. And I think that looks pretty piney. I think I would like it actually darker, but the other thing I do sometimes is just come in with a clean brush, and I just kind of go over these needles, and I just clean it and dry it and pull them out a little to get a little more of that wispy effect. So a dry brush will do that for you. And then when that gets a little drier, I'm gonna go back and add more pigment down the middle so we don't lose sort of all the shape. Let's try to do 2 more of those. Okay, now this one is a lot more sharply defined, so I am gonna get some water and I'm just gonna go over some of the needles because I kind of like the blurrier look, if that makes sense. Then I'll dry my brush completely and I'll kind of wisp it out again. And again, just play with how you do pine. You can do it, oh gosh, any number of ways. This is just kind of how it's coming together today. So this is going to add a little definition. You can go over these needles a little if we want. So you can go back over it when it's dry or even when it's still wet. But I just think that's kind of fun. So you can, like I said, you can have this effect where it's kind of blurry and wet. All right, maybe one more of those and we'll be done with the pine part. Okay, I think the last thing I want to do, well, I say the last thing, not really the last thing. I want to add a couple more leaves and then I want to mess with our berries a little, just to fill it out a little more. I'm just going to add a leaf up here. And maybe like a small one here. And I like to go over, like I have the pine going over the berries or over some of these leaves and vice versa. And I think that, again, we're just adding some layers and I think that that's pretty. Again, it's looking, you know, kind of nice like a bouquet now. So I'm gonna take my two and just finish off with a few more berries. And for this last berry, I'm just going to layer it over top of an existing berry. So again, we have a good amount of layering here, hidden behind leaves, berries on top of berries, and that sort of thing. And I think that makes just a sweet little, you know, wintry or holiday bouquet. So let's move on to our third one. All right, let's start this last one here in our corner, and let's start our same old way. I'm gonna mix some maybe crimson and maybe even bring in a little magenta for a different tone of berry here. And we're gonna try some holly leaves on this one. So start in our traditional way with our berries. I'm gonna do these kind of nice and big because they're gonna be kind of more like, you know, like holly berries. So he got huge, but that's okay. Let's do 3 to start. It's kind of like the traditional setup. So those are nice and saturated. You can see it's a little bit of a different shade of red. Let's go back with clean water and add our third one. Kind of like behind these. These are really bleeding in because they're so wet right now, but that's okay. We can always pick up some of the pigment later if we feel like it's too much. So I'm trying to make my shape sort of correct here as if this berry was behind these other two. I like that. I think that's good. I'm going to stick with my 6 right now, and I'm going to take a little hint on your greens. When you really want your greens to coordinate with whatever color your florals are or your berries, mix a little of that berry color into the green. So I'm actually going to take a little bit of my magenta tones and I'm going to mix them in with my sap. And I think that'll give us a nice like coordinating green for our holly leaf. So the way I do holly is pretty simple and basic. So I'll show you. It's almost like a backwards C. and then like almost like a forward one that sets the leaf up. And then I just do like sweeping motion. So it's like a sweep and then out here to where the tip would be, right there. And then I'll bring that sweeping motion back, and then I just connect the dots here, okay? So just gonna connect the dots. Then what I like to do is get just really water on my brush, and I like to pull in all this pigment from our greens. So you can see how, again, we have 3 different tones of berries, and we also have 3 different green tones going. It's just a way to keep things interesting, to mix your foliage and your berries, or if you're working with florals, starting, you know, usually with a base of crimson on almost all these berries, and then just mixing in either pinks or purpley tones or other reddish tones. So I like the look of that leaf. Let's do 2 more of these. So you see I've tucked this one behind by not putting the very tip of it there. So now we have this berry is on top of this leaf, and I think that looks good. And let's just finish off and do our last one. Turn your paper if it's easier for you. I'm literally gonna move to get a better angle. And I think we might tuck this one behind this berry. So we got a little bit of an awkward angle there because I wasn't gonna turn my paper and mess up the video and for you all, but you can see how that's working. And we'll bring it right up. I'm not gonna touch, I think that berry's dry, but I'm not gonna touch it quite yet because I don't wanna bleed that into the berry. Although remember that bleeds are like the pretty part of watercolor, so don't worry too much if that happens. So for this one, I think maybe the last thing we'll do, we could add a few more berries in the center, and I just want to add these. It's just another thing you can use as a filler or to take up white space in a bouquet. Just add some little flicks. So let's go ahead and do a couple berries here that are smaller. I think I'll take my 2 for this. So I'm going to add a very saturated berry, but I'm going to tuck it nicely behind this more pale berry. And then I'll pull off of that one to add a 5th berry here just with water. Okay, and for the very last thing, we're going to take our 6 and we're going to get a lot of pigment. We're going to plant our brush and then just flick out some, literally flicks, I don't even know what else to call them. And I'm going to do them in different lengths, so like short, long, short, and you can see what I mean. So they have a little bit different thickness, and it's very much like a mark making feel. It's not, you might even choke up on your brush, like hold it up higher. So maybe that's not choking up. Anyway, hold it up higher where you have less control rather than down low where you have a lot of control, because we're not looking for like a super controlled motion. So here, he got kind of wild, but that's literally just the hand motion I'm using. Like that. So let's take a step and look at it. Yeah, not bad. I feel like it needs maybe a little more. We could add, with our 2, we could add some veins. I think holly leaves generally show like a vein in the center. I'm not trying to worry about too much realism here, obviously, but we could like do a little vein. So I'm just doing like a touch and then kind of like a push and a lift. I don't know if I love the look of veining on these, but it adds interest, I think, to it. And this one's wet, so I'm not sure what kind of it might just bleed out, which is fine, and then we can go back over it. Yeah, it's just really wet, which is, you know, not a problem. All right, so that just adds a little more to it. Sometimes I like to go in and just darken one or two of the flicks so they're like a little bit darker than the others. I think that can be interesting. Even put like an edge on it. So I've added some more berries and a few more flicks here. It's always great when you think you're filming and you're totally not filming. So I did not catch these berries on camera, but you can see I have added some behind some of the existing leaves that are now dry, and just try to round out the composition a little more in terms of balance, because I have some long, sprigs going off over here, and it's not exactly, I mean, we don't want it symmetrical, but it's not exactly sort of balanced in composition at the moment, which happens all the time when I paint these. None of these are perfectly balanced right because I'm not really pre-planning them, and it's kind of the fun actually of just painting. Like, I would encourage you to paint an entire page of just berries and leaves of different types of leaves and some of these fillers. It's just very therapeutic. And now I'm just just winging it here. I'm just adding things with my wet paintbrush with no real rhyme or reason. And sometimes it just grows across the whole page, and that's fine. And you can practice kind of tucking them in, and I don't know, I think it's just fun. So I hope that you will try these. I hope that you'll try the different shades of greens, the different shades of berries, and some of these fillers and different types of leaves. It's a good exercise for that, but it's also good to use on a note card or a place card or a gift tag, like we said. So if you try this, I hope that you will show us on Instagram and tag the Pigeon Letters and tag Sweet Seasons Art and show us what you do, whether it's for the holidays or for any other occasion. I would love to see all of your leaves and berries. Thanks for joining me, and happy painting.